Welcome to Savage Simplicity Storytellers, where I talk with smart women doing smart things to simplify their lives. I'm your host, Bernadette Hill, and today I'm talking with guest Leticia Garay, a Latina strategist, an MBA, and the voice behind the blog Living in Color, where she writes unapologetically about mental health, identity, and the courage to reinvent yourself, showing us that healing and strategy aren't opposites, but partners in creating a life that truly reflects who you are. In this episode, Healing Out Loud and Living in Color, Leticia shares how she rebuilt her life and what it means to rebrand yourself after a trauma, and how women can simplify their lives with passion, purpose, and power. Welcome to the podcast, Leticia.
Thank you so much, Bernadette, for having me. I'm very excited to talk today.
I'm excited to chat as well. We've had a couple of conversations, and this has been a while in the making, so appreciate you taking time out for the show. Where did you grow up, and what were you like as a child?
So I grew up in the East Bay here in California, so not too far away from where I'm currently located in Sacramento. Um, And I think that's kind of a testament to how I grew up in that I was a little bit reserved and sheltered, almost to the point of being very nervous about taking chances and risks and trying to get everything done right in a timely manner or in a way that seemed like it was the right flow of actions in order to get from point A to point B. So I would definitely say that growing up, I had to grow up in a way that protected me from a lot of what I was exposed to as a child, and it made me a little more shy or cautious in shaping the life that I eventually have come to know and like, even from this point on. So that's how I would summarize my upbringing here.
Okay, and how do you think that the world perceived you?
Well, so you can't tell here on camera, but I know you know this, but I am 6'2", and so I definitely I felt like I lived a dichotomy where I was kind of grew up to, or taught to put my head down and work really hard and kind of follow the rules. And hopefully it would all piece together in a way that worked out the way it was supposed to. Um, which also meant that I didn't really like being in the spotlight. But having always been a taller person, I think especially a Latina, it's a little bit more rare. And then on top of that, being a woman, it was always hard to stay away from the spotlight, either for positive or negative reasons. And so part of my identity has been coming to terms with what that means, what the expectation has been versus what I've wanted and expectations for my own life versus how the world kind of sees me in those spaces. And so part of the journey has been learning to be take up more of that space, not just physically, but figuratively, making some of those spaces that work for who I want to be moving forward, and sometimes challenging some of those norms that I grew up with, even in a way that might make myself uncomfortable when I'm self-reflecting.
That's interesting. So, as a kid, you learned how to be kind of shy, introverted, didn't want to be in the spotlight, and nervous about sort of being more out there in front of others. Did did you struggle with perfectionism at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was probably my biggest fault in an ironic way. Definitely, I think the more successful I became, the more pressure it felt like. I needed to maintain this idea, this image of who I wanted to be and what I needed to look like from the outside, especially as I started learning what a professional looked like, and what those spaces kind of came out to being for the norm or the idea of success looked like. And so as I started figuring that out, ironically, it was kind of like I reached a pivotal point in life where I realized that having this standard or having these expectations of myself was kind of holding myself back, not just from growth, but from being happy and being present.
So it sounds like you pressured yourself to fit in. Did others pressure you as well? Is that where that came from, or did it really come from inside of you that you didn't felt you didn't fit in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely something that I had to explore with my therapist for a long time. And I do think it was a combination of things, more so internally than externally. I think the idea of, being successful and having people that were excited to see the success then brought up this idea of like, well, I can't let them down. So I would say it's more internally driven than externally driven. I've had a pretty good support system considering who's been in my space and where I've been in life, but I definitely think that I built that own pressure for myself. And I think a lot of us do with the circumstances of thinking that we are here as an example for people or we are, kind of paving a way, especially as a first generation professional, where we don't always know where we're looking at or where we're trying to go. We just hear a general idea of what we should be doing.
Did you feel some pressure from your family to become a certain professional or come across a certain way? Uh,
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of funny because having worked in admissions in the past, especially with undergraduates, there's this idea that a lot of first generation students think there really are three professions, engineering, doctor, and lawyer. And so, I joke around like that, not to make light of the fact that, there's a lack of accessibility and other structural limitations, but more so that you do grow up with this idea or this notion of like there is a predestined path that you should be on in order to achieve success. And so it's hard to think outside the box in some cases, especially as you're getting exposed to different experiences or different people or different paths and seeing, does that actually align with who I am? And what does that even look like? Because sometimes you think you know who you are given all of that internal or external pressure. And then it turns out that you might not actually have been in alignment, but that's part of the self-discovery that comes with some of these challenges growing up.
well, and when did that start to change for you? About how old were you, or where were you in your life when you started to go, oh, I have these gifts, or I have something that I want to say, and I'm not being my authentic self, or maybe you were, and something changed.
Yeah, I've always been a writer at heart. Even as a child, I loved writing stories. I thought it was a really great way to express myself. And I think in part because I didn't want to be vocal or in that spotlight, so I could kind of hide behind the pen and paper. But I think that for me, the real turning point was actually more of an adult. Um, Went through college again through the notion of you go to college, that's kind of one of the epitome accomplishments you can do, and then once you get there, the idea is you graduate and you have a full-time job, hopefully something that's constant and something that you might not have to even pivot out of. You could just make it into a career, a little bit old-fashioned in that way. And then I kind of did that. I went into a career, not one that I actually planned on or one that I even knew existed, but it ended up being a good fit. And then eventually actually found that I had outgrown it faster than I wanted to
Hmm.
realize. And so I found myself kind of at this point in life where I was starting to burn out a little bit because I was trying to keep pace with potentially building opportunities that just weren't there because I was scared of leaving a comfort zone. But on
Hmm.
top of that, in my personal life, it also came out that that idea of leaving a comfort zone and staying where I was now was a better or the lesser of two evils. It turned out that I was actually wrong in both arenas, both professionally and personally. And so
Hmm.
um, it was just kind of like the right or wrong time, I guess, depending on how you want to see it. But it was a pivotal point where I was in my mid 20s and something had to change. Something had to give in a way that had to do a 180 in my mindset of what I was going to do next for myself.
So you found yourself in a place where you weren't quite happy with your career path, weren't quite happy in a relationship or in a situation that you were in at the time, and decided that something needed to change. What was that aha moment for you?
Yeah. So, for me, my aha moment actually came from some trauma. And so I found myself in not really knowing what to make of the situation. And I think in that space of having to come to terms with that truth, and realizing that I needed more support outside of these perfectionist ideas, that
Hmm.
I really kind of had my back against the wall and realized I needed to get some help, not just for the situation here, but get some help in getting clarity about who I wanted to be moving down the road and what that looked like. And it ultimately came down to being okay with stepping out of my comfort zone. And that was really hard to do, not just personally, but professionally, because realistically, the personal and the professional are tied together. And in order to have clarity, you need to have a little bit of clarity in both arenas to know how to move forward.
Women often feel pressure to kind of get back to normal after a traumatic event. Did you feel that way? Did you have pressure to try to get back to who you were?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would reframe it as a pressure to go back to what felt comfortable.
Mm,
But at that point, the idea of what felt comfortable was non-existent. So, um, I say luckily, even though some people might argue with me on the timing here, but I had actually just started my MBA at that time. And
mm.
so it kind of gave me this new purpose of direction and also a safer space to an extent to be able to explore different opportunities for myself and say, like, okay, maybe I've never taken a finance course before, but here I am. What do I need to do to get through the class, but also kind of reassure myself that I am capable of doing things that I never thought I could do. And that reframe was something that, quite frankly, helped me survive.
Mm,
Um, as I was going through this new I guess like identity crisis almost,
mhm,
of discovering who I was and what I wanted to do. And the MBA, originally was this idea to move forward in my career, but it ended up being a way to vocalize or take up more of that space that I had wanted to do. I just didn't know how, or what I guess it would end up being.
yeah. So your sense of purpose changed, your career goals changed, how you felt about yourself and thought about yourself changed. Um, what parts of you did you have to sort of release or redefine to start living in color?
That's a great question. I think there are a lot of thoughts, and like mindsets that you have to challenge when you go through a couple of like through a process of relearning who you are. I don't know that I would say I've completely let them go. They come up in some cases. Some things are a little bit harder to let go of, even as you're healing, and it takes some more time in some cases. But I think the biggest one has been learning. I don't want to say like learning to love yourself, although that is very true, but more so challenging the idea that you are worthy of being loved. And I think that's a bigger statement because it is not just encompassing self-love, but the external love of other people. And I do believe that this is a process I didn't do by myself, right? I'm
Mm,
more so on this side now because I had a community through my program and through the friends who stepped up when it looked like things were going wrong to help shape me and reaffirm that until I believed it enough for myself to be able to remind myself in these cases. But I think that is also that piece of self-love is what you need to motivate yourself, right? And challenge yourself in a very healthy way.
I love that you said to remind yourself that you're worthy of love, right? Not just being loved, loving others, and that your love is important.
Hmm.
It's kind of really impactful. Sorry for
It's overlooked a lot, right? We overlook it a lot for ourselves too, and just the impact that we have as a person, and even as small as a one-on-one relationship, right? And what that
Mhm.
means to someone else. We never know how much that can mean.
Yeah, and that's what we have here in life, right? That's all that's what we hope for is to be loved and to love others. So you talk about writing. How did tell us a little bit about how writing helped you heal or has helped you heal?
Yeah, well, writing was a way that made me feel a little more grounded and was a way to physically be able to pinpoint gaslighting. And so
Mm,
it started off as a survival tool. That's how I kept records of what I was feeling and able to kind of hold the space to say, hey, it's okay to have these feelings.
mhm,
Um, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. That's ended up being kind of this life-saving thing. But in order to actually make progress, I had to write it down and name it. And so that's where it started. And it was something that I continued through graduate program. Um, as a way to start reframing, right?
mhm,
Because I couldn't reframe in live time. I needed to actually put it down and then reflect back. And when I
mhm,
had something tangible, it made it easier for myself to actually do that. And then eventually through the program, I actually took a class on personal branding. And the idea is that you can, present yourself in a way that attaches you to your professional goals by
mm,
having kind of a brand. But when I was in that class, they encouraged us to just think of something that we were very passionate about. And for me, mental health came up maybe because that's where I was that juncture in life. But um, really talking about like how does the mental health actually impact professionalism? Because up until that point, I had my inner circle of classmates who had become really good friends, help me through some of this. But in the professional sphere outside of that, no one knew what I was going through. I was still showing up to work. I was still giving 110%, still burning out on the side while recovering from, depression. But nobody saw that. They saw me coming up as maybe a little bit more, um, less guarded, and they thought maybe I was just more comfortable in my role, but really it's just I didn't have the energy to come out as the professional person I had built up in this perfectionist setting.
mhm,
And so the writing there then became a little bit more, it went from therapeutic to more of that, like, let's actually open it up to hopefully having some conversation so that people can think about where they are and if there's anything they need to change, but also know that it's not something that they need to be ashamed of. Like, I think especially high functioning people with depression or anxiety are sometimes left out of the conversation because they're doing everything they need to do, except take care of themselves. And
yeah.
so, yeah, that's how that kind of developed into what it is now for it being kind of a blog.
I love that you talk about, writing things down in order to reflect back and understand your emotions and about how, when you talked a little bit about therapy, and I'll just share as well that I go to therapy. And one of the very first questions that I asked as an adult woman was, is it okay to feel these feelings? Can you tell me when it's okay to feel these feelings and when it's okay to feel these feelings? And I was a shock to me to learn that, oh, it's always okay to have feelings. What we do with them is important and stuff. And we don't, we got to control our behavior, but otherwise the feelings themselves are okay. And the more that we
Mhm.
can sit with them and reflect on them, the less outward we have to make it because we can really process them.
Mhm.
And it changed my life just learning that my feelings were okay. So I can't even imagine the turn that you had, after sort of being so quiet and reserved, and then suddenly having a traumatic event happen to you, and being on, changing a career path, and how you presented yourself. So you just introduced the blog, and I wanted to ask you about, is that where, so these experiences in your writing, it led to living in color, the blog. Can you tell us about that? Where to find it, and what you write about?
Yeah, yeah. So the blog started off being very focused on mental health. More recently, I'm seeing it kind of do a rebranding in that I'm incorporating a little bit more of like how mental health has impacted other factions of my life, including the career pivot I'm working towards, as well as like how to build some boundaries in the workspace, for example. So things that still impact mental health and how mental health impacts that. So kind of a reciprocal relationship. So it still focuses on that, but a little bit more of like what I say, like a Latina lifestyle in the professional space might be a better way of putting it in there, or first generation professional navigating those spaces. And then, yeah, the idea there is that apart from sharing some of my lived experiences, kind of also sharing some best practices and resources as I go along. So most recently, for example, I created a spreadsheet that called Wins in Color, and the color is actually an acronym for a way to document your accomplishments at work. Partly
Oh.
not just like figuring out like the actionable items and results, but also having a self-reflective piece on which additional projects or tasks you did and how you felt about them. Is that something that you want to continue doing? Is this something that you felt you grew from? Is this something that aligns with your career goals? Because I think oftentimes, I don't know how other people are, but I sometimes joke that I'm a Girl Scout. So I like to collect badges and accomplishments, right? It's part of that perfectionist mentality that I'm always trying to challenge. But especially in the past, I've been a hoarder of projects. And some of these projects have been great, but some of these projects have been kind of beneath what I'm capable of, right? And so it's kind of this like energy that could have been spent challenging yourself in a different way. But unless you have that self-reflective piece to kind of call yourself out and hold yourself accountable to do better next time, then we don't always realize it in time or quick enough before the burnout settles in. So the idea there is to be more intentional about the work that we're doing in the spaces that we currently have, whether we're making a career pivot or we're still in the space that we really want to be in.
That's great advice. I love the fact that not just journaling, but actually recording your accomplishments as time goes on, and even not even just recording the accomplishments, but how you felt about something, or an action, or something that happened to you. I think that's important because so many people struggle with figuring out what they want to do. The podcast, Savage Simplicity, is all about building a life that works for you. Well, what would work for you? You have to figure that out first.
Mhm.
And the people that are introspective, self-reflective, know a lot about themselves, study themselves a lot, tend to be have higher success rates in life, because they're able to, like you just said, I'm wasting some time or energy, really,
Mhm.
working on things that aren't serving me or value added to my lifestyle. So I'm going to let those go. Sometimes it's hard. Let that go, and then really focus on the things that really bring me joy. And looking at your background, looks like your blog definitely brings you joy. Do you have a community in around what your writing?
Yeah, yeah. So, I think right now it's a little bit more of a passion project, right? It's something that I do in hopes of reaching the right people in a way that will be impactful for them. I have my mini listserv and I am a little bit more active on social media. I did take a break when I started a new role, and so part of that was again being realistic with myself of not having to do everything all at once, because that's
Hmm.
definitely something that I've learned about myself. So being patient with the progress that I'm hoping to make. But yeah, it's a small community. I've gotten some feedback about people at least taking the bigger picture ideas, and I think that's all I can really ask for. And hopefully people feel inspired to find their own color in some sort of way where they're making an impact as well.
Where did you get the name Living in Color, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so actually came from another course. So yeah, when I said that MBA was transformative, I really do mean that in my personal life as well. But I took a class where we had to give a more personal speech. And so I actually wrote a speech about that relationship and the sexual assault, although at that time I couldn't label it yet. And through the writing, it ended up being a little bit more metaphorical with a sunset. That's how I actually framed the experience. And so from that kind of became the pillar of kind of what I wanted to write when I first started the blog. And so it went from the idea of a relationship sunsetting or life stages sunsetting, and being afraid of the dark, but also knowing that eventually the dark will become light. And so that kind of metaphor transferred over into the bigger idea of having color and being seen a little bit more than if you were, kind of toning yourself down in maybe a more standard or a more, I don't want to say predefined way, but kind of in a more structured way of the expectations that are set by ourselves or by others, in a more traditional black and white way. So it's kind of a metaphor that's carried on, as this has developed.
And so now do you feel like you're living your authentic self?
I think on my good days, I definitely am. I still have my bad days where I revert back to what I maybe am influenced to see as a better path, or where I think comparison definitely creeps up a lot in some cases where I might look back and think, oh, I could have been at this point instead if I had, stuck with this decision or if this hadn't happened. But I think part of the authenticity actually comes from saying that it's okay to have those bad days. And those bad days, then as long as you don't let them be the majority of your days and they don't become the full story, then you're actually making progress. And so yeah, all that to say that I feel a lot more sure about who I am, even if I'm still piecing it together day by day.
And how do you keep your day simple? Knowing that, you've got the perfectionist issues, and that you might overload yourself. How do you now think about keeping your days simple?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've really had to live with the idea of being present, right? What can I do at this present time? What is most important at this time? What is within my control? And so that and kind of breaking things down into baby steps to not overwhelm myself has
Hmm.
been very helpful. Those have been the more tangible or logistical tips, I think, to answer that question. But I think generally, it's been you have to be careful about looking in the past sometimes, because if you go back to compare things, that's not always a good use of your time or a good way to challenge negative mindsets. But what I've found helpful has actually been saying, look at how far I've come from 4 years ago. I
Hmm.
never would have thought my life would have looked the way that it is. And maybe it's not everything I would have wanted. Like 4 years in the past, I might have wanted something else, or maybe I still want that goal or that whatever it may be, and it's not here, but I know I'm making progress and I know that I'm not stuck. I actually have control of being able to move forward. Whereas 4 years ago, I felt like I was always running that hamster wheel,
Hmm.
and not really in control of my life. And I think that control piece has been a game changer in being able to just say, okay, we'll take it day by day and we're going to, no matter what, make progress, even if it's smaller or bigger than what we planned for that day, or even in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. What advice do you have for women who feel stuck and that need to set some boundaries? How are you able to set boundaries? And well, that's the question. How are you able to set boundaries, and what advice do you have for others?
Yeah, pending, life-threatening situations where it's like, yeah, you need to seek help and lean into people that love you and get professional help as well. I think on the day-to-day, my advice would be to hold yourself accountable, right? Part of that self-love is accountability. And no one's going to be able to make that decision for you to set a boundary or to move in a certain way or to take up that challenge that you've been putting off for a long time. And so even if it is tracking something down, writing it down in order to help you say, hey, like it's in writing, it's fact that I hated that project and I never want to do that again. So next
Hmm.
time I'm going to say, thanks for the offer. I'm going to actually use my time and my effort for a different project. That is how you kind of grow, and that is how you build your confidence in yourself. And it's also how you keep yourself safe. So, my tip, yeah, write it down, hold yourself accountable if you need that first step. But that accountability piece is super important.
Right. And don't be afraid to say no. That's important too. That's important
That's the
too.
scary one. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
reframe it as accountability because the big NO word is always scary for people.
I know, I know. Well, my son is 3 and he's yelling it at me constantly. And I'm like, man, do I say it that much? I need to stop saying it so much. All right. So what is one belief that you finally had to let go of in order to heal and move forward to where you are today?
I struggled a lot with like black and white thinking. No pun intended, given that the blog is called in color. But
Oh,
I think the idea of there's a right way to do things is definitely something that's been challenged and something I've had to let go of in order
hmm.
to give myself grace, but also give myself the opportunity to do something that's maybe even better than I anticipated.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful takeaway. There is no such thing as perfection. All we can ever do is evolve. All we ever are is one step farther the next day if we're lucky. So, what is the color that you would choose to represent your healing journey?
That I always feel like a traitor because turquoise is actually my favorite color. But my blog is all pink. And yeah, I'll probably stick with that pink.
Mm.
Part of the journey has been not just reclaiming my femininity, but also learning to lean into soft and being vulnerable.
Mm.
And so I think that's always been something that I've struggled with, but I've moved away from a toxic relationship, and now I'm actually recently engaged with somebody who's been super patient. And we had learning curve there in that I had to really learn to open up and be vulnerable and be okay with who I was, who I am, and bringing that into a space to have that love grow. So I
Mhm.
think that pink is not really intuitively what I want to say from just my past experience and all that, but I think it's the most symbolic, and it just makes sense that naturally the blog ended up being more pink than blue.
That's wonderful. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations that you found happiness with a partner. That is rare. It's awesome when it happens. Last question. What advice would you give someone who is feeling like you were feeling 4 years ago? And maybe not with, the particulars, but in terms of maybe having gone through a traumatic incident, could be maybe divorce, could be anything, right? And they're really wanting to rebuild their life and find happiness again. What would you suggest they should do as their very next step?
Lean into the uncomfortable, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
think that's
wonderful.
really where the growth happens, in a way that, yeah, I think you have to lean into the uncomfortable to remind yourself of who you are and what you're capable of.
That's wonderful advice. And for you, do you do you feel like you were rebirthed at the end of this, or do you feel like you were just an evolved Leticia?
That's a really great question. I think, wow. It's interesting. I think at different stages, I would have had different answers for you. I went from like not recognizing myself at all, like didn't know who I was looking at in the mirror, to then it started feeling like I had started seeing who I used to be back when I first started college, and I had these ideas of all the possibilities. And then I feel like more recently, though, I look at myself in the mirror and I see some of that like very youthful person of who I was, but I also see a lot of new things that I never saw before. And so I do think it's a combination of things. I don't know
Hmm.
that I would say it's a complete rebirth because there's a lot of me that's always been there. It's just been hidden for one
Hmm.
reason or another. But there's a lot of new that's changed from what's been hidden. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's a different answer. Maybe it's kind of a mosaic of things, some new pieces and some old pieces that have been polished up a little bit.
Well, I think you have. Thank you for sharing your very personal journey and story. I think a lot of women may not have had the exact same experiences of you that you have, but I think we all end up in as one space or another at one time in our life or other saying, okay, this is who I thought I was, and this is what sort of my life has been like because of that, but that's not really who I wanted to be or who I thought I was meant to be. And
Mhm.
what's after this? What's next? And I know that I had my own personal journey about 15 years ago where I sort of went on a trek, trying to rediscover who I was. And I'm still on that journey, just like you mentioned that you
Mhm.
are. But I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story so that others can learn from, you rising from the ashes. And you have a beautiful personality and a beautiful mosaic of colors. And I'm so glad that you were able to make time to share your story.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's my pleasure. I think it's always very healing to talk about it. And so hopefully people find some value in it.
Many thanks to Leticia Garay, who's proof that even after the hardest chapters, you can choose to rewrite your story in full color. If her journey resonated with you, follow Leticia's blog and look for the free resources she mentioned at leticialivingincolor.com or follow Leticia on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Leticia Garay. If Leticia's story inspired you, take the next step with us. Like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. Then, check out the Savage Simplicity swag shop for journals, gear, and tools that support your own journey of simplicity and reinvention. I personally designed every piece to spark reflection, intention, and action. And coming this October, I'm so excited to announce we're launching the Savage Simplicity Circle Community, a space to learn, apply, and practice the CI shift, a mindset shift toward living and practicing the continuous improvement philosophy, the key ingredient to building a life that works for you. Want to be a guest on the podcast? Check out the show notes for a link to apply. Thank you for listening to this episode of Savage Simplicity Storytellers. Until next time, this has been your host, Bernadette Hill, reminding you that to simplify your life, sometimes you have to be savage.